speaker here today for lunch is David Malone, and he is President and CEO of Gateway Financial, which he helped found in 1982. The company specializes in sophisticated uses of life insurance for complex needs, including generational wealth planning for high net worth individuals and executive benefits for public and private companies. David was appointed last year by the Governor of Pennsylvania as chairman of the state's Workforce Investment Board for Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, where he remains a board member. Mr. Malone is chairman of the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, and he also serves on the board of directors of FMB Corporation, the Western Pennsylvania Surgery Center, the Pittsburgh Technology Collaborative, Youth Places, and the Multiple Sclerosis Society. He is a native of Pittsburgh. He earned his BS in economics from Allegheny College and later earned the Chartered Life Underwriter and Chartered Financial Consultant designations from the American College. And there is a number of involvement that he has in the professional and the civic community, and I could go on and on. My conversation that we had here at the table, I'm sure you're going to be able to enjoy his message, and he is also then going to open it up for question and answers. So be prepared in things that you would like to ask him since he's here joining us here today. Please welcome David Malone.
Good afternoon. Let me first of all just thank you for having me today. When I talked to Dr. Kerr and Patty about coming up here, we had a few conversations, and the important thing that sort of drove me to come is that you were here. At the end of this sort of session, and by the way, I don't like to lecture. I really would appreciate if anyone has any questions, comments, raise your hand, stop me anytime you want, throw a roll. Since you're a neighbor of Jim Scahill, I know you can't be shy, and I would encourage that. But your involvement today is critical to whatever solution you're going to reach, and without an integrated effort to solve this problem, and by integrated I mean educators, employers, elected officials, organized labor, and parents, kids. If you aren't all at the table talking about this problem, we have no chance of solution. Let me tell you just quickly a little bit about sort of my background and what drove me to get interested in this. And then what I thought I would do is tell you what tools are now available through the state, and then tell you the solution that I sort of think in outline form is the one that I'm highly recommended you consider pursuing. And we are going to pursue it in Allegheny County. First of all, I have 3 kids. All of them are in college right now. But I just mentioned to Dr. Kerr, I've spent a lot of time up here because 2 of them are hockey players. So this drive from Pine Township to what's the name of your rink? Belmont. Yeah, it was fun. I did notice that some things I remember about your community is that you're very welcoming to visiting teams. Unusual ways of expressing it. You were vocal. I also, in my business life, advise to successful businesses, and sort of the framework of the people that we work with are primarily high income, high net worth owners of closely held, minimum net worth of $10 million. So they are companies that have succeeded in whatever they're doing. We also advise to most of the Fortune 100s in this region, and the common denominator between all those, the problem they're all having, is human capital. Every single one of them has the same conversation that I just heard in the breakout session that I was in. It's startling to me how frequently these conversations occur and how little each of us know about our problems, because there's a lot of common denominators. I also serve on a college board, Robert Morris University, so I understand higher ed as well. I'm also serving on Mark Roosevelt's, who's the new superintendent of the Pittsburgh school system, on his committee for reform. And by the way, if you think you have issues, his issues are yours times 10. I mean, he can't even get the guns out of his school, so it's complex. But I should mention, we sit here in this beautiful facility today. In that capacity, our committee has visited about 20 different technical schools all over the country. And I have to tell you that By the way, this is the best meal I had in every one of them. They tried to feed me at home. It's also the nicest facility I've been in. We've been in a lot of them. And generally speaking, what communities do is look at technical education as where they send the kids that aren't able to perform in academics. And your ability to mix the two is really key to the success of building a workforce in the future. We can talk about that a little bit later. I also served on the local workforce investment board. So I have a pretty good idea what Fred's going through when he's trying to bring consensus on these issues. Back in '99 when I got involved, by the way, this is kind of inane and interesting as well, but in '99 when they started this new workforce system, there was originally to be 23 different workforce investment areas in the state of Pennsylvania, 2 of them which were the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. Now, if you know that, it just seemed ridiculous to me that there would be 2 systems. One was a hole in the other one. So whenever the then mayor asked me to chair his workforce investment board, and by the way, then nobody knew what it was. You guys think you're having trouble communicating what you do now. Nobody knew the system at all. And I sort of did some investigation, and I said I would only consider doing it if we merged the 2 entities. So there's only 22 entities now in Pennsylvania. And I would highly recommend that you sort of think about that as a model too. The goods need to be working together on a far more consistent basis. But just so you know, you're not alone in your problems. There were only half a dozen merged workforce investment areas in the entire country. So all the things you're dealing with, others have dealt with, trying to worry about who's on what address and how you cross lines and so on. Those are common problems. Let me just tell you a couple of things that were kind of startling. And by the way, during the Roosevelt reform meetings, we had a number of meetings with representatives from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which at this point is probably the center of knowledge about education in the world. And they just rattle off statistic after statistic, which sort of really drove home the problem that we have as a country. And that the essential problem is that our education system is doing a very good job. It's just not doing a good job at what we need to be working on. If you were to look at the schools around the country now and look at them 30 years ago, they actually look the same. If you took the pictures, they're the same buildings. You know, the same buildings we went to school with are still being occupied today. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but the structure of the curriculum really, while it's not identical, really follows along the way. And I'll give you a simple example. We teach biology, chemistry, and physics in that order. Are there teachers here? Why do we teach in that order? You know?
It's alphabetical.
Because it's alphabetical. That's true. If you were going to school in India, what would be, and every teacher knew that in the room, by the way. If you were going to school in India, those are one course. And by the way, if you were going to school in India and you were a senior graduating, you would have spent 30% more time in the classroom than the American seniors have done. And this whole structure that we're sitting in, and maybe up here you actually have people that work on farms in the summer, but generally speaking, most Americans don't need to take the summer off to bring the crops in, which is why our system was designed the way it was. So around the country, all schools, all communities are having discussions about what hours we need to go to school and how much time we should have off. That's a very complex subject, and it's not one I'm even going to attempt to discuss today, but it's an issue that we need to address as a country. Today, as we sit here, these kids are projected to have about 15 to 20 jobs in their careers. Some of those of us who are more mature, my age, on average had about 7 or 8. Some of those more mature than me had 2 to 3 jobs in their entire career. So thinking about what your career is going to look like is a substantially complex subject. You used to go to school, and if you went to college, you went to college, or if you went into the workplace. And by the way, when my dad graduated, 7 of 10 jobs required high school or less. Today, only 3 of 10 jobs require high school or less. And by the way, we don't need 4-year colleges necessarily, but when you used to get out of school, you pursued your career, you worked for a company, and you worked your way up the ladder. The rungs of the ladder are gone. Kids are not going to work at one company or two companies in their career. They're going to work at 15 or 20. And if you think about that, the whole way we set up our curriculum ought to address that. Kids are not being prepared to think about even what career they want to listen to or think about while they're in school, but to be able to move careers is a complicated world, and we're not even talking about that. By the way, there's only one guidance counselor for every 424 kids on average in the state of Pennsylvania. So if we think the guidance counselor system currently, as it exists, is going to solve our problem, we need to think about something else. Today's guidance counselors are lucky if they can take care of getting the transcripts out, getting the kids that have to have special drugs and special counseling and so on. They were not designed to do, you're a guidance counselor, obviously.
Thank you.
I made one friend today.
For life.
You should also know that 1 of 4 people working in America today have been at their job for less than a year, and 1 of 2 less than 5 years. This whole 15-20 job thing I'm talking about is happening fast. You should also know that technical information is doubling every 2 years. So if you go to a 4-year school, by the time you get out, your first year is irrelevant. So if you think about the way we teach and the way we learn now, it needs to be substantially different. There will be no more in the future this many years in high school, this many years in college, and get a job. You will never stop learning. We need to think that way, and we don't think that way right now. What I wanted to do now is just tell you what dollars are available from the state of Pennsylvania. And whether you like the governor or not, I need you to understand that this guy really understands what we're talking about here today. His main things are education and workforce development. No matter whether you read about penguins or whatever other nonsense you read about. This is what he talks about the most. And if you talk to him and you want to get him excited, well, you could insult him, but you could also talk about this subject, and he gets passionate about it. And we're fortunate about that, because in the last budget year, it was a hard budget year. Every legislator I ever met says, this year is going to be a hard budget year, by the way. So there's intense competition for dollars in all of our lives and in the state of Pennsylvania and so on. And it really is hard to balance. But the good news is that he, along with the legislature, cooperated and put $110 million of new money on the table for workforce development in various forms. And I'm going to go over that with you. Why that's important is the federal legislation that created the Workforce Investment Act essentially mandated all work. So we could go and tell Fred some great ideas about things we wanted to do, and he would listen politely and tell you he has no cash. So it's really hard for the WIUP in the old system to do anything. And by the way, it's still hard. But at least we have $110 million of cash that we can use on a discretionary basis. The other thing that I think the legislator and the governor are clearly convinced is that workforce development is economic development. So when we hear about all the money that was put on the table for Westinghouse, if you read about that particular company, that, and by the way, that's Charlotte offered Westinghouse a package of $100 million. Pennsylvania kept them with a package of about $60 million. And the reason is, besides the president's from Pittsburgh, which was very helpful, but he's owned by a Japanese, so he had to convince them that this was a good decision. And his decision, his ability to convince them was clearly a function of access to higher learning. The CMU, a combination of CMU and Pitt, were the difference between what our region had and what Charlotte had. Remember, they had a $40 million advantage. When I tell you human capital is critical, and if you can successfully create an environment where you're training your people in a way that employers can appreciate, you will have a distinct advantage over the rest of the world. Did I finish that way? Yes. Yeah, I did. Okay. All right, let me just tell you a couple of things that are available. By the way, 82% of Pennsylvania employers tell us that they can't find adequate workers. So 82%. And we conducted that survey ourselves. And we also, by the way, produce, as a region, more advanced degrees than anywhere but 4 places in America, yet we employ more high school or less than anywhere in America. So if you think of how startling that is, everyone wants what we're producing, and we're not able to keep it. So, just as a background, what the legislation did was focused on what is called high priority or growth occupations. So all the world is broken down into clusters in the workforce area in Pennsylvania. So healthcare is one, manufacturing is one, IT is one. So there's, how many, Fred? 22 growth clusters identified. I'm not sure if I have that number right, but there's something like that. And a growth cluster was defined as an industry cluster that had the potential to grow if we had more workers, or an existing high employer area that had high propensity for retirement or changes that if we were able to invest and train properly, we could advance in that area. And by the way, we Pennsylvanians are good at criticizing ourselves. The cluster concept, the way of attacking this, using that technique, is now being touted as the way, and the rest of the country is quickly catching up to that same argument. Okay. The first thing we sort of decided when we built this legislation was that if we are going to wait for the system to fix it, it's not going to get fixed. If we wait for education, and I've talked to Dr. Kerr and I've talked to Glenn Smartchins here, who's very retired from Mount Lebanon, but reasonably well knowledge. And I should tell you a little history. About 6 years ago, when I first met Dr. Smartchins, we the business community were convinced that all the woes that we were suffering with respect to workforce development was a function of the poor job that teachers were doing. And so we were going to call the superintendents and tell them they better teach better. So we called them into our room, if you remember this, and we said, okay, here's what we think. This is what business is saying. What do you think? And I remember, I never forgot. It wasn't you, and I've forgotten the guy who said it. He said, you know, you're the first business group that ever even asked us what we think. So the fact that you're here together is huge progress, but you need to understand these guys have been thinking this for an awful long time. They've been worrying about this, and they need your help to move forward. So what we formed, or what we suggested, was that industry needs to drive this, and we don't want to tell industry what to do. So we'll put some cash on the table for industry to form groups, and then we'll put some cash on the table for them to be able to implement sort of the training programs that they think they need. So there's $5 million available for the industries to organize, and then there's another $15 million to take what they sort of recommend and try to implement. Now, it's my view, by the way, that $5 million of organizational money ought to be a small amount compared to what industry would be willing to do that. If industry believed there was a sustainable, legitimate way to attack this problem, they would make these dollars available. So we're using the $5 million to just sort of get everybody at the table. You know, it's going out generally in chunks of 200,000 or 50,000. It's not huge chunks, but it is available to do that. And I would highly recommend you take advantage of this. By the way, it looks like, I know we have one representative here, I forgot where it is. But anyways, it looks like this is all going to stand again in this particular budget. I probably shouldn't say that because I'll jinx myself. We put on the table $10 million to train nurse educators. One of the clusters that is well organized is education. I mean, healthcare. And getting back to my last point about the $5 million should be a small part. When industry feels the pain, they'll respond. Healthcare was in danger of being able to deliver even basic services because they didn't have nurses. So it was dollars. They knew they were in serious trouble, besides all the safety things you could read about and so on. Those are real issues for healthcare administrators, so they reacted quickest. And they've been the most aggressive in trying to solve their problem. What happened is we took the number of students in nursing programs, and actually in just 2 years, they've doubled. There's twice as many people in the nursing and allied health system right now than there was 2 years ago. And our problem now is that we can't find teachers. So we put $10 million on the table to train trainers. We put $3 million on the table for universities to pursue educators. You know, if there were some guru in some particular industry that would be valuable for your community college system to attract, there would be money there to bring them here. We put $10 million on the table, this was big, to get less than full-time students the ability to have aid. This is past high school and college, but what's happened is the entire aid system in Pennsylvania is only built on those people who can go to school full-time. So if you remember my lifelong learning discussion, that's one part of the population, but it's nowhere near the whole. So we need to be able to figure out how, you know, someone who's out in the workforce but wants to move forward in their career, has kids, doesn't have kids, whatever the problem is, can go full-time, and we need to be able to subsidize that. There's $60,000 on the table. This sounds small, but we're trying to figure out how people can get college credits for life experiences. Many of obviously the things you learn in the real world are more valuable than what you learn in the classroom quite often. But if someone's got high school, wants to go back, can't afford to go, put 2, 3, 4 years back into the system, how do we get them credit for what they've done since they've been out of college? We added another $9 million for grants to students. We gave $22.8 million of additional funding. When I say we, don't think that's really me. You don't understand what I'm saying. $22.8 million to the community colleges, which is woefully inadequate. The community college, the success of the ability to expand the community college system is absolutely critical to us being able to pursue, to succeed in the workforce war. $22.8 million doesn't catch them up to where they were. Now, if you can carry that message wherever you need to carry it, please remember that. If you want information about it and why, I'll tell you, but I think I only have 15 more minutes. Project 720. 720 is the number of days of kids in school from freshman to senior year. We know the statistics about how far below minimum standards for math and reading our kids are coming out. So we put a pilot program in to try to enhance that. So there are now 41 schools that have opted for 720 status and received funding, and they've got special counseling going on. And by the way, it's working. Dual enrollment. I heard something about this in the group I was in. This one was actually one of my main things that I worked on. It took 3 years. As my kids, when they were seniors at Pine Richland, did virtually nothing once they got accepted into college. It drove me nuts. I couldn't stand it. They just sat there and watched TV. The problem is they've reached their requirements. The high school system doesn't sort of let them move around to other courses, and yet we have seats at colleges and community colleges where we could have them doing something. And by the way, 48% of students entering the state higher ed system have to take a remedial course. 48%. So I said to the governor, how much could we be spending on all that remedial when we could do it while they're watching TV? So right now, and the holdup, by the way, was the high school didn't want to give up their share of the tuition, and therefore the college wouldn't have gotten paid. So now they both get paid. They both get paid if the kid's a student. So it was designed for those high-achieving kids, but also for regular kids to take advantage. Let's see. I think I got most of it. We have 38 million more for career and technical. I think I got everything. It might not add up to 110 because I might have forgotten something, but I'm happy to provide any more information anywhere. Now, what at the end of the day, in my view, needs to happen, and I think most of the pundits in this world that are working on this world would agree, is that we must dramatically impact our base education system so it's more integrated with the workforce. 93% of a kid's performance on standardized achievement tests when they enter college is a function of what happens to them before they get to kindergarten. Basically, the more affluent the kid is, the more their parents are involved, they have a competitive advantage. So, what that sort of spells out is problems in a lot of areas. First of all, Pennsylvania, prior to Rendell's changing this was one of 5 states that had no funding for kindergarten, no mandatory kindergarten requirement. 5 states, Kentucky, I forget which 5 they were, but clearly a competitive disadvantage. Those largely African-American, low-income, urban kids have no chance. They get to school in such a hole, there's no way they can get out of it. 2 incomes where the parents can't pay attention to kids. If there's no caring adult around kids when they're young, reading to them, telling them, sort of basic stuff, then they start in a great hole. The good news is that the statistics also show that that trend can be reversed as long as they get some attention from some adult at a relatively young age. And that can go all the way up to 9th grade. Statistics are pretty clear on that. So we need to have as much emphasis as early as possible, and then we need to go throughout the system as well. What I believe is necessary for us to accomplish what I've sort of heard around here today is that kids have to talk to kids, kids have to talk to parents, parents have to talk to educators, educators have to talk to employers, and around that circle about careers at a much younger age. Right now, when I drove my kids around, they talked about they won a football game, they talked about their video games, they talked about a movie. They never talked about careers, ever. Eventually, no discussion. I don't know, does anybody else have a different experience than that? Based on the work group I was in, I think it was pretty clear that that's pretty traditional. What we'd like to try to see happening is that there begins to be career awareness in the 7th and 8th grade. There needs to be some sort of job shadowing, 9th, 10th grade, and internships by the 10th grade. Now, what that will accomplish, in my view, is to change the dialogue. If you ever, how many business people are here? And how many have interns in the workforce? When that kid came in, where not somebody's kid or cousin or large customers, it was a regular intern program that you recruit. Tell me the difference between the kid the first day and the last day. Tell me. None? Whose kids had internships? None. Well, let me tell you my experience. When a kid gets out of school and goes into the workforce and gets a meaningful exposure to what life is going to be like in the workforce, they change. First of all, when they walk in, they change because they're not doing what kids do in school. They're around adults. So they stand up straighter, their demeanor gets better. Maybe their parents didn't get through them totally, but they know they're not supposed to behave the way they did in school. They're supposed to be different around adults. Kids have no belief. It's almost, they look at employers almost with disdain. If they can get through their courses, they don't think anybody cares how they behave, how they talk to their peers, whether they show up or not. They need to understand that that's not true. So what we're trying to build, what we're trying to ask is that the business take the lead and work with educators, and parents and students to go to their cluster, sit down, and not because they're nice people. I don't want business motivated because this makes you feel good. By the way, it does make you feel good. But I don't want that motivation. I want what Adam Smith called enlightened self-interest. If business does not do this, they will not survive. Period. There will be no one to work. They'll all be in India. Believe me, they want our jobs. Someone quoted a statistic in our breakout today, but there are more kids in kindergarten in China than we have in our whole school system. And they all learn 3 languages. They go to school as many hours more, as I told you, and so on and so forth.